There we go. Now we should. All right, now you should be able to hear me. Good. Hopefully you can hear me online as well. So it's good to be with y'all again this evening. This morning we looked at Jesus is calling for us not to be angry or insult others, as that was equated to murder in God's eyes. It's a very serious thing. And so I want to explore anger once again because it's not something we often talk about or look at from a biblical perspective. It's often a rather ignored aspect within the Bible, within our character, within God's character himself. And so tonight I want to look at the image of God. Remember, we were created in his image. And I want to look at how he displays anger within his image and how we should emulate that. And we talked about and looked at some different scriptures this morning that pointed towards us. We need to not have our own anger, the anger of man, but the anger of God that leads to righteousness. So we're going to look at God in his instances, a couple where he gets angry. And as we are created in his image, how we might be able to also present that and emulate that, reflect that back into our own lives. So we need to answer a few questions as we explore these stories, as we explore his word. Why does God get angry? And when he is, what does his anger cause him to do? If you guys remember back to our study in Exodus 34, 6 and 7, we saw this attribute in God, as he describes himself as one who is slow to anger, and one who also has wrath. And so, if you remember back to that, again, he has very slow anger. And that's one of the key attributes of God's anger, is that it is slow. So in every story we're going to look at tonight, we'll see the slowness of God's anger. But there's more attributes to this, and so we're going to explore those as well. So the passages that I want to look at were a little bit long. And so as I was looking over my sermon before giving it this evening, I realized it was longer than this morning's sermon. And so we're not going to be able to read the stories in their entirety, but I'll give you the passages and you can go read them on your own time a little bit later. But I'll give you the points and I'll give you a brief synopsis of the story. So the first time we see God getting angry in the Bible is in Exodus chapter 4, in verses 10 through 17. And this is an interesting and a very significant place because this is the very first time in the Bible that we see God being called angry, or said that he has gotten angry at someone. And this is before Exodus 34, where he says that he is slow to anger. And so it's just interesting to look at this one, as sometimes the first time anything is ever mentioned, it's always very significant. So here in this place in Scripture, in Exodus 4, in verses 10 through 17, we see God talking to Moses. And he's saying, Moses, please go save my people. I've heard their cries for rescue because they're being oppressed and tortured by the Egyptians. And Moses is like, I'm not able to. I'm not worthy. I'm not capable enough. I'm not equipped. I can't do this. I'm slow. I'm heavy of mouth and of tongue. I'm slow in speech. I'm not good at talking. This isn't me, God. They're not looking for me. He's afraid. He thinks himself inadequate. And God asks him 4 times. And on the 5th time, Moses rejects him. God gets angry at him. And that's very interesting. So we see this aspect of God being slow to anger once again. He requests 5 times before he becomes angry. Now, what does his anger cause him to do? He provides him Aaron, his brother. He's saying, okay, if you cannot speak well, then I will give you Aaron, and he will speak for you. Now go and do as I've commanded you, because you will speak to him, and he will speak to the people. And so that is the solution that God presents in his anger. It's just such an interesting picture of God's anger. First, it's slow. He's very patient with Moses. Then, in his anger, there's nothing that's negative that happens to Moses. He's kind to him. He's forgiving. He's like, okay, If you really don't think you can do it, though I know you can, I will provide you Aaron. And later on, it's really cool to watch Moses develop in his leadership role with the Israelites. He comes to no longer to require Aaron to speak for him. He often starts speaking and judging on his own, so much so he's not relying enough on others. And you'll see Jethro, his father-in-law, come along later, which I think is really cool. So you need some guys to be able to delegate to. But it's very interesting, Moses' journey. Besides that, it's very interesting here seeing God's anger in action. So why did he get angry? It was because his people were in danger. They were being harmed, and the person who was supposed to rescue them refused him. I find that interesting. So just note that, and we'll continue on. The second time, or the second story we're going to look at, is the pattern of Judges. In Judges chapter 2, in verses 11 through 23, we'll see a pattern develop here as God talks in the book of Judges. So here in Judges 2, 11 through 23, we see this pattern start to emerge. The people of Israel used to be faithful to God, but now they've come to the promised land. They've conquered it, or at least they have in the majority, and they've begun to settle down. But there is still people there who they need to continue to conquer and drive out, who are not supposed to be there, and who are going to drag them away into idolatry. But the people settle down, they're faithful to God, they've done what they've told them, but then they stop. And they start to pursue evil and idolatry and all these things, and they get dragged away. And God gets angry at them, and he punishes them. First, he disciplines them lightly, and he continues to be patient with them. Maybe sending a drought so that they might wake up and say, oh, hey, we're not doing the right thing. Or he, does a couple other things where it's to open their eyes and say, hey, there's something more coming. There's a harsher judgment coming if you don't turn back to me, because what you're doing is evil. You're worshiping other gods. You're sacrificing your children. You're doing horrible deeds. This is not who my people should be. But they continue. And then the wrath of God comes out, and they're delivered into the hand of their enemies. That is the judgment that is theirs for living an evil life. And then as the people in their distress cries out to God, he has compassion on them. He loves them. So he was angry with them, but that didn't stay the case. He punishes them. He judges them. They repent. They turn back to him. He hears their cries, and he responds in a loving and caring way, like a father would. And he delivers them. And he places above them a leader who is righteous. Whoever that may be. There's many in the book of Judges. And then later on, he'll have kings. And these righteous leaders, as they're over the Israelites do pretty good. They follow after God. They seek after him. They make mistakes. They're not perfect people. But they faithfully follow him as they're called to do. But then their leaders die. And then they turn back to evil. And once again, this cycle just repeats over and over again. And we see this cycle continue all the way till the Romans destroy them after Jesus' death. And that's the destruction of the temple. And AD, I believe it's 82? Yeah, something like that. And so that just cycle goes on and on and on. And yet God is always patient with his people. He is always loving. But he does become angry when they do evil things, when they do horrible things. It's not at the little mistakes that he gets angry at. It's when they live a life contrary to him. And I want you to think of God in this role. He is their father, but further than that, he's also married to them. They're his wife, in a sense. That is the covenant language that describes him and them. And now as we look today, we also have that same covenant language. We are not only his children, but we are called the bride of Christ, the church. He's married to us through this covenant. And so think of the way that relates, and the way it would hurt if you were to be turned on by a child or a wife. Often, our evil acts, our idolatry is compared to adultery throughout the whole Old Testament and even into the New Testament. When we have been living a life with God of righteousness, and then we turn our backs on Him to go back to a life of evil, think of how that would make you feel. Imagine your children or your wife if they turned their back on you and walked away from you and did everything contrary to what you wanted them to do, not just because you wanted them to do it, but because it's what was better for them, a better way of life, and now they've chosen a worse way of life that's hurting them, that is destructive and hurtful to others. It would make you angry, I'd imagine, as it would most people. This is the righteous anger of God. And this anger stands up to evil, and it brings punishment, not just to punish, not to punish because they're angry, but to hopefully bring a better life to those who are lost. That's an interesting aspect of God's anger, of righteous anger, that we don't often consider. It is always to bring to better the life of the person who we are angry at. And if necessary, it results in judgment, which is something to mourn. You notice God makes judgments which end in the death of people, and those are never happy occasions. And often in those occasions, He's turned from anger to sadness, deep sadness. If you look at the flood, it says He was sad when He sent the flood. He grieved the loss of the people on the earth because they were so evil that they had to be destroyed. And I believe this carries on into the New Testament. I can't remember which passage mentions it, but there's a passage that talks about how God wishes for none to perish, and that sin and evil grieves Him. So this is an interesting aspect of God. His judgments often come from sadness after the anger, because they're lost completely. The anger often drives Him to try to bring people back to Him. We don't often see anger like that. And I think that's a really important thing. We will read this story because I think we have time. But it's another interesting story that sometimes confuses us. And in fact, confused David when it originally happened. So we'll look at that later. This is where Uzziah and the Ark of the Covenant. And you may not remember this story. Some of you may have never heard it or read it. But I find it very interesting. So in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 11, if you want to read with me there, we'll look at the story of Uzziah. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 11 says this: David again gathered all the chosen men in Israel, 30,000. David got up and went to all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called the name of Yahweh of hosts, upon which is the cherubim sit. They loaded the ark of God onto a new utility cart, and they carried it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Now Uzziah and Ohio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new utility cart along. So they brought it up from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill with the ark of God, and Ohio was going before the ark. Now David and all the house of Israel were dancing before Yahweh with all kinds of musical instruments made from ash trees, with zithers, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals, when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon. Uzziah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it, because the oxen had stumbled. Then the anger of God, of Yahweh, was kindled against Uzziah. And God struck him down there because of the indiscretion, and he died there beside the ark of God. David was angry because Yahweh had burst out against Uzziah, and he called the place Perez Uzziah until this day. But David feared Yahweh on that day and said, "How can the ark of Yahweh come to me?" However, David was not willing to bring the ark of Yahweh to himself, to the city of David. So David caused it to turn to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. So the ark of Yahweh remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and Yahweh blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. Now, this is a bit of an odd story, and if you notice, even David at this time doesn't understand what God did here. He doesn't understand his judgment. He becomes angry with God. for the judgment that he casts on Uzziah. He was like, he was saving your ark from disgrace of falling on the ground. And this may seem to be a quick anger, but I want to look at the story maybe from a different perspective. One that I think David comes to understand in verse 11 after some time. The people of Israel here are not being faithful to God as some may think. They're like, oh, they're bringing the ark and to the place where they're supposed to worship. David's trying to do this thing, but they're not doing it the way they're supposed to. You know, if you look at the law, they're supposed to carry the ark on poles, long poles with men on each pole, so that this type of thing doesn't happen. No one is supposed to touch the ark because the ark is the full holiness and presence of God within the earth. And man in this state cannot touch the holiness of God. It causes death. It's dangerous to those who are evil, who have sinned. And so they're not clean. They cannot be with the holiness of God. It's like us trying to walk into a fire, or a fireman trying to walk into a fire without a safety suit and water to help them. It's something that's dangerous to those that are not protected from it, or that are like it. And so when Uzziah reaches out and touches the ark, he's breaking one of the most important commands, not to touch it at all, because it causes death to be in the presence of God as a human in that state. But before that, they already were not doing what God had called them to. God's not angry with them. I think he has understanding that they're trying to do the right thing, or at least we're not told within the story that he's angry with them until Uzziah touches the ark. But all along, they haven't been obeying him. And this causes the death of Uzziah. If they'd been using the poles to begin with, they would have never struck a pothole, and Uzziah would have never touched the ark and died. So this is really a result of their disobedience. And then it's so interesting. David gets angry with God. And he's afraid of God, and yet God is patient with him. He is kind to David. Doesn't tell us he ever gets angry with David. He blesses the house where the ark is at. And I think David comes to his realization, oh, we did something wrong here. It was not God, but us. And so he's like, okay, I will bring the ark. And later on, they take the ark in the correct way. If you read a little bit further, I don't remember exactly how far, but they bring the ark, and no one else dies. And David rejoices, and God blesses the people. So we see here that God is patient with all the people involved. But when God's holiness is desecrated, it results in death. And his anger will burn against the one who does not uphold his holiness. God is holy. Now, what's interesting about this story is it's not exactly the same for us. It's really cool how it's changed from them. We're not men like Uzziah anymore. Well, we are. But we have Jesus. And he has covered us in his blood so that we can now stand in the presence of God and not die. He is our protection and makes us like God. He makes us holy like he is holy, so that we can stand before him in confidence. And we looked at that today in class, actually, in 1 John chapter 5, which I didn't plan out. That just is the way it happened, so I think that's really cool. I don't think it's a coincidence, but God kind of had a cool plan there. So we have confidence when we stand before God. We can be within his presence, unlike Uzziah here. But still, we should make sure we uphold his holiness. We should not treat it like something lightly. We should not live a life of sin, because that is insulting to his holiness, and that is dangerous, because that makes him angry. He's given us a great gift. Another story we will see is Jesus in the temple. And this is found in Mark 11, verse 15-ish, or Luke 19, verse 45-ish. And we don't have time to read the story, but hopefully you know it well. Here Jesus goes into the temple, and he sees those that are changing money, and they're cheating people out of their money. And they're lying to the people. So if the people bring a sacrifice to God that is blemished, or, some people travel from very long distances with their sacrifices, and maybe it becomes blemished on the way. When they get to the temple, they need an unblemished sacrifice. So they sometimes have to buy one from the temple. But the people here in the temple, they're looking at these people sacrificing and they're saying, oh, that one's not good enough, that one's not good enough, when they are. They're perfectly fine, they're unblemished. And then they charge them more than what was necessary or what was good. And they take that one that they say was unblemished and they put it in the pen with those that they're selling. And then they'll turn around and sell it for a higher price. So they're cheating the people out of the money. And some people look at the story and they're like, oh, Jesus gets angry all of a sudden. Well, there's something we need to recognize also here. We need the history of this situation. This temple and the places of giving sacrifice around the Passover is not new to Jesus. He has been going to this temple and celebrating Passover every single time since he was a young child. And we see this story early on in the story of Matthew. I believe it's also in Luke. I can't remember if it's in Mark's accounting. It's not in John's. But Jesus goes to the Passover as a young child. He has seen the people cheating the people, God's people, out of money for their own gain. They're taking God's sacrifices for him and making it about their profit. And he becomes angry now, after all of these years. And now Jesus has been teaching these people for 3 whole years. He's been going to this temple. He's been speaking against the scribes and the Pharisees and saying, you need to turn to God. You need to turn from your evil ways. This isn't the first time they've heard this story. And yet they've continued to pervert God's temple and make it a place of thieves and robbers. So this is not a quick anger by any means of Jesus. In fact, this is one of the final things he does before his death. It's one of the things that causes them to want to really kill him. But he's been patient. He's been kind. He's worked with these people, and now this anger drives him to tell the people, you have disobeyed God. You have refused him all the way up until this point, and now is your last chance. And so he drives them out, hoping to wake them up from their sin. But instead, they kill him for it. So Jesus' anger, Jesus as God incarnate, displays anger well, the anger of God. He's slow to it. He's patient. And even in this last act, the last act of anger, it's more about trying to get them to repent so that he can have peace with his people than actually driving them out of the temple. But they refuse him and they kill him. So let's take a moment and assess these. What have we seen? God is slow to anger. He is patient in it. When he does get angry, he disciplines. And how does he discipline? He disciplines for the purpose of restoring those who are doing evil to himself. Except for one instance, where we insult and reject his holiness. In which case, judgment comes very quickly. Moses in Deuteronomy recounts the previous generation's sins, the way that they have turned against God and made him angry. So all throughout Exodus and Numbers, the Israelites journey through the desert, and he's telling the story in Deuteronomy before the people enter the land of Israel. And he tells the people, he gives them a warning. He talks about the law and how there's a blessing and a curse. For those who are obedient, there's blessing. For those who are disobedient, there's a curse. And he warns the people to choose life and blessing and warns them about provoking God to anger, like their parents did. And the way that they do this is by loving God, and loving God is being obedient to him. We see this teaching in the New Testament as well, in John chapter 14, verses 21 through 24. When Jesus says, those who love me will do what I command. We should well hear the words of Moses and heed the warning. There's life, grace, forgiveness, compassion, blessings, but we can choose to reject them and instead choose death, destruction, judgment, and curse. We have an amazing God, and we should choose life. Moses predicts they'll turn away from God and provoke him to anger, and they do. They do not turn back to him. But if they do turn back to him, God will restore them. And we can read a lot about that all throughout Deuteronomy. But we know God is reasonable. He's forgiving. He does not want people to live in death and curse. He wants them to be with him. He will forgive. This should be also a core attribute of ours. We should be seeking to forgive, to be at peace, to bring people life. Even in God's anger, this is still his desire, to bring people to life and to restore them. That should be within us. Every time we get angry, we should seek people to restore them to life, to restore them to peace with each other and to God. We've seen God's anger. We've seen the image of it, I think, well, both from the New Testament and the Old. And now we need to imitate this image. A person who is truly good will get angry sometimes, but only with the anger of God. Not the anger of man, but slowly. Our God doesn't punish unjustly. In fact, he punishes out of his justice. We likewise should only ever judge with the standard of God. Never our own standard. Never self-seeking. Our God is patient and will forgive even in his anger. But we shouldn't push him to anger, because that's a dangerous road to tread down. He will judge those who do evil. We should love him, be obedient to him, and live at peace with him and each other. We have a righteous intercessor who acts on our behalf. Our God is patient and loving, as we have seen today. He does not want to be angry. He wishes to be at peace with us. Follow his commands and love him. He will forgive sins, but you cannot live a life of sin. He sent Jesus, his son, for us. If you're struggling with a life of sin, and if you're in need of prayer or enter into covenant with Jesus today, answer his call. He wishes to live at peace with you. Please reach out to someone here or come forward as we stand.